Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Monomaniac93 here. Just want to make this video today ranking all 6 James Bond actors. I'm going to rank them in order from my least favorite to my favorite. So there are 6 James Bond actors and there are 23 James Bond films. I'm not going to include Casino Royale, the original one, and I don't know, there's another James Bond movie that came before that, but there are 6 actors that portray James Bond for 23 straight films. So I'm just going to give you my take and my opinions on all 6 of these actors, and I'm going to rank them from my least favorite to my favorite, like I said. So starting with my least favorite actor who portrayed James Bond, George Lazenby at number 6. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a good film. I think if they had like Sean Connery or Daniel Craig in this film, this could possibly be the best James Bond film ever. And it is a great movie, and it's a lot of fun to watch this. But George Lazenby brings this movie from maybe a 4 or 5 star film to a 3.5 star film, because he's just not very, he's just very dry in my opinion as James Bond. He doesn't really have a certain style to him. You know how Sean Connery has a very romantic, sexy, suave style to him, whereas Roger Moore has, you know, kind of more of a humorous style. Then Daniel Craig is more of a tough guy. He's just very straightforward, just kind of just says out the lines, and he's just not very interesting or exciting to watch at all. But I do recommend, if you haven't seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service, go see it. It's a great film. Could be even better if they had a different actor portraying James Bond. So I have George Lazenby as my number 6. At number 5, I have Pierce Brosnan. Now, I hate being critical on Pierce Brosnan because I'm not a huge fan of his movies that he made, the James Bond movies that when he was James Bond. I was not a huge fan of the 4 that he made. I did like GoldenEye, but some other ones like Die Another Day and The World Is Not Enough, I think are just horrible films, and I hate to put him at number 5, but to be honest, I think, you know, the kind of movies that these actors were in kind of has some role in my ranking, and it's just very unfortunate that Pierce Brosnan was put in some pretty awful movies like Die Another Day and The World Is Not Enough. Tomorrow Never Dies was okay, and GoldenEye was a really good film, but Pierce Brosnan is my number 5. I'm going to give you some other good reasons why he's my number 5. I just think that he's just not a very natural, suave type James Bond. Everything seems forced with him, like he's forcing himself to be suave, to be, like James Bond. I just think for a guy like Sean Connery or Daniel Craig, I just feel it just comes natural to them, whereas Pierce Brosnan feels a little more forced to me. But he's just number 5. He's my number 5. I don't think he's terrible, but I just don't think he's great in the role as James Bond. I think he makes a pretty good, decent James Bond, and if he made some better movies, I think he might be higher on my list. But for right now, I have him at number 5 because unfortunately he made some pretty awful films. At number 4, I have Timothy Dalton. Now, Timothy Dalton is the only actor, in my opinion, that hasn't been a part of a horrible James Bond film. I think every single actor has been a part of some pretty god-awful James Bond film. Sean Connery with Diamonds Are Forever, Roger Moore with Moonraker, or A View to a Kill, Pierce Brosnan with Die Another Day, and Daniel Craig with Quantum of Solace. They've all made a bad film, but luckily for Timothy Dalton, he hasn't been a part of an awful film. License to Kill and Living Daylights are good, solid films. They're not great in my opinion, but Timothy Dalton is number 4 for me. I think out of all six of these actors, Timothy Dalton, in my opinion, is probably the best actor, and he's kind of like a Shakespearean type actor, like almost like a Benedict Cumberbatch. He kind of reminds me of Benedict Cumberbatch, a great actor, very distinguished, but I just do not think that he fits the role of James Bond very well. Even though he's a terrific, I think he's an excellent actor. He's just not. He just doesn't fit right. He's very skinny. He's not very muscular in the first place, so he kind of doesn't look like James Bond there too. But he just doesn't have a toughness to him about him. So that's why I have him at number 4. But I think he was solid, and his movies are good too. But he's just not the best when you consider some other actors, which I'll get into a little bit later. So my number 3 is going to be Roger Moore. Now, Roger Moore, I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of his films. He's the second James Bond after Sean Connery, and I really enjoyed the Sean Connery films, especially the first 3. Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger, because they had a very serious take on James Bond. He was more of a spy and a romancer. And Daniel Craig's James Bond was more of, like Jason Bourne, it felt like. And that's what's unique about all 6 James Bond is they all have kind of a different style to them. But Roger Moore in particular had a very, almost like comical, campy, humorous style to him, and a lot of people were not a fan of his James Bond, and a lot of people think that he ruined the series, and he's criticized as the guy that was not as good as Sean Connery by many people. And you know what? He's made a lot of pretty awful films, I think, some good ones, but his films just don't. A lot of his films are not even in the top tier of James Bond films. But with that said, I do think Roger Moore for me is a good James Bond. Even though he delivers a lot of one-liners, I think he's very charming as a guy. I think he's very likable. Even though he's not a very tough and physical James Bond, I just think there's something about him, like his persona and his personality, that's just likable. I don't know. He's just perfect word for him is just charming. He's just. He's a good ladies' man, and he's good at delivering jokes. He may not be the best in action sequences, but there's just something about him that's just very likable. And I know for a lot of you guys, he might be at the bottom of your list, but he's number 3 on mine because he's just a likable guy, and I think Roger Moore is just a good actor. So he's my number 3. Number 2 is Daniel Craig. Now, when Daniel Craig first came out in Casino Royale, I wasn't a huge fan of him because it was a totally different take on James Bond. I wasn't expecting, a very physical and brutish James Bond. At the beginning of Casino Royale, he's strangling a guy in the restroom, and I was like, no, this is not James Bond. I wasn't a fan of it at first. But I think Daniel Craig, after watching him in Quantum of Solace and especially Skyfall, which he gives his best performance in, I have a lot more respect for Daniel Craig now, and I'm putting him at number 2 because I just feel that he earns it in all areas. The physical aspect of James Bond, him being tough, he can really kick somebody. He can really beat somebody up, and I think out of all the actors, this guy gives the best ass whooping out of any James Bond. So he entered in that category. He's smooth, suave, romantic. So he earns it in that area of being suave and the ladies' man too. And he's just overall great James Bond, and it's just so enjoyable to see him on screen. And we're very fortunate that he's going to come back for some more James Bond movies. So he's at my number 2. And my number 1 is Sean Connery. Now, Daniel Craig could eventually surpass Sean Connery for me, but the reason why I have Sean Connery at number 1 is because early on in Sean Connery's career when he first started off as James Bond, I thought he was excellent, especially in his first three movies. And his first three movies are actually my favorites: Doctor No, Goldfinger, and From Russia with Love. Those three I think are his best films, and his later films, they're okay, but they're not as great as the first three in my opinion. And in the first film, he comes up and he gives his entrance, in the, like, when he's playing poker and he says Bond, James Bond, and he's got a cigarette. I thought that was just so epic. He's very physical when he needs to be physical, but he's just suave, smooth. He's very debonair, very handsome. He's got a great movement to him, and overall he's just fun to watch, and he's just so enjoyable to watch. He just seems like a natural, whereas some of the other actors feel like they're forcing themselves to be James Bond. He just feels like James Bond. And when I was ranking these James Bond, for my number one, it was hard for me to pick. But if you close your eyes and say, if you think about James Bond, and you have to think about, who's the first guy that comes into your head when you think about James Bond. And when I close my eyes and when I think about James Bond, Sean Connery is the first guy that comes up. And for me, he's number one for me. Now, the only gripe I have about Sean Connery is that in his later films, it feels like he's phoning in his performance. He seems a little bored, and he doesn't give quite as good a performance as he did like in Goldfinger or in From Russia with Love. And, towards the end, he starts to grow out of the role. He starts to get old. But that was my only gripe with him. But in his first, 4 movies, I thought he was excellent. And to me, he's still the best James Bond. Now, I will say this. If Daniel Craig, when he continues on his James movies, if he keeps up the pace, like he did in his first 3 films, and he keeps giving good performance after good performance, I will eventually put Daniel Craig as number 1. But for right now, I have Sean Connery as my number 1, because Sean Connery was great in his first 3 films, and eventually started to kind of, deteriorate for me. And Daniel Craig was great in his first 3 films, but if he keeps it up, he should pass Sean Connery as the best James Bond for me. But it's really neck and neck for 1 and 2, but I got to give it to Sean Connery. So my ranking is number 6, George Lazenby, number 5, Pierce Brosnan, number 4, Timothy Dalton, number 3, Roger Moore, number 2, Daniel Craig, and number 1, Sean Connery. Let me know what you guys think. I want to see your ranking out there too. And thank you guys for watching this. Please like this, please comment, and subscribe if you like to. Thank you guys.